Welcome to Pearson International GCSE. Before we start, could you all just type something into the chat box just to make sure that you've all got proper access to the chat box and you could use it? Thank you. All right, good morning. We've got a few people putting good morning into the chat box. Right, that seems to be fine. We will be using that on a couple of times as we go through the presentation. The agenda for this morning is a welcome and to look at the International GCSE features, the design of the specification and the key documentation that goes with it. We then will look at the assessment model, the content of the specification, the assessment objectives, the taxonomy, the command words that will be used in exam questions, which is very important, the core practicals that your students need to be familiar with, the math skills that they need to be familiar with, and that will be tested on the exam paper. And then finally, we will look at the support that's available from Pearson as you are teaching the International GCSE. The aims and objectives at the end of today, you should be able to identify how the qualification is devised and the fundamental documentation that goes with it, to review the content of the qualification, to explore how to plan the course and plan the lessons, to understand the assessment of the qualification and how to prepare students for it, and identify the support that's available from Pearson. Now, first of all, I'd like to find out a little bit about all of you. So into the chat box, can you just type how long you've been teaching this specification, or if you're new to it, whether or not your students were entered for the last examination series, and what is the single most important thing you hope to take away from the session. So if you could put that in the chat box now, be very helpful. If you could all put the answers to these brief questions into the chat box, please. It seems that we've got quite a wide range of experience here. A lot of you are doing this for the first time or have only got a little bit of experience, but quite a lot of you are, a few of you have been teaching this for a very long time. A few people have said that they want to know the difference between iGCSE and Edexcel. The iGCSE is specifically for international students, although the content is very, very similar. The assessment is very similar, except that there isn't, we'll come on to it later, but there isn't a modular route in the home Edexcel course, but there is in the International GCSE. So welcome to Pearson. Pearson Edexcel is the world's leading learning company and the UK's largest awarding organisation. The international heritage stretches back over 150 years. And today, Pearson partners with schools, universities, and employers worldwide, offering world-class, globally recognised qualifications to over 3.5 million students a year. Over 10 million exam scripts are marked on behalf of the UK Department for Education each year, and Pearson operate in 70 countries worldwide. So they've a lot of experience in international qualifications. Now, the first thing that we're going to look at is the specification design and key documentation. It's very important that you refer to the specification. It contains all the key information required for teaching the course. It can be downloaded directly from the Pearson website, where you will also find many other useful materials. The specification contains the content that you need to make sure you follow. It also includes the assessment objectives, which we'll come on to later, but which are very important. And it includes things like the math skills that need to be taught and command words and lots of useful information. It's important to use all of it, not just the content. This is where you will find it on Pearson's website. You need to go to International GCSE Biology, and then you can download the specification from there. And here's a summary of what the specification contains. And as I've said, it is important to use all of it. It's got the content arranged by topics. It's also got the assessment model, the assessment objectives, which are the skills that we test on the papers and the proportions of marks allocated to each skill, the taxonomy, all the command words used in questions, which your students should be familiar with because it will direct them into the type of answers they need, the mathematical skills that might be tested in the exams, the practical skills, which will list the core practicals and also the type of practical skills the students will be expected to know, and then the transferable skills, other skills that can be taught through international biology, international GCSE biology. The website just shows, as this has been prepared to just show a picture of the website, but it is the latest one that you should be using, because I'm aware that it's changed for this series. So it's a most up-to-date specification that you definitely should be using. Now, the first thing that we're going to look at is to understand how the course is assessed and have a look at the assessment model. You now have a choice of either linear or modular examinations. There's no separate practical exam. Students are expected to be familiar with all the core practicals, but practical skills are assessed by questions on the question papers. There are two papers, paper 1 and paper 2. Both have similar style questions, but paper 2 has additional content that won't appear in paper 1. And the papers are no longer tiered. They both can be graded from 9 to 1, which is the new grading in which 9 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. Now, there are two different routes of assessment. You can follow the modular route or you can follow the linear route. The Pearson are the only exam board to offer a modular course, and some of you may feel that this is the more appropriate one for your students. It is a choice that it's a choice for you. If you're happy with the linear approach, there's no pressure to move to the modular route. Linear international GCSEs will continue to be offered and taken widely by students around the world. However, if you believe the modular route will be of benefit to your existing students or could help you attract more prospective families to your school, we can support you in moving to this route for your selection of subjects. If you have any questions on the modular option, please contact your local representative. And the linear route is the same as it has been. You can resit assessments for all units together in one exam series, and the grade you receive is calculated at the end of that exam series in which they set their assessments. For the modular route, unit assessments can be taken over multiple exam series, and the grades are calculated on the raw marks, which are then converted to a uniform mark scale. And this means that students can resit individual units in any exam series, and once they've got all their unit results, they can then cash these in for a grade. So we're now going to have a look at the two different papers, paper 1 and then paper 2. The modular and linear approach contain the same content, but the modular approach breaks the journey into 2 units with an exam at the end of each unit. If you're already offering Pearson International GCSE linear, this will continue to be offered and remain exactly as it is. Students taking the linear approach will have studied all the content before the exam, so our linear specification is structured in a way where all topics can be assessed in both exam papers. So if you're taking the linear route, all topics come up in both exam papers, although there are some parts of each topic that will only come up in paper 2. If you're taking the modular route, you will know what's going to come up in each paper, and paper 1 will test your students on topic 1 and topic 2, and then paper 2 will test the remaining topics. The examinations on both routes contain a mixture of different question styles, including multiple choice questions, short answer questions, calculations, and extended open response questions. So there's no difference in the type of questions in the 2 papers, just the content. And for the modular one, you know what its particular topics. For the linear one on paper 1, it's everything in the specification that is not in bold. And a calculator can be used in the examination. So for paper 2, for the linear route, it's a maximum of 70 marks, so it's 38.9% of the total international GCSE. So it's not exactly a 50-50 split. Paper 1 carries more marks, paper 2 carries quite slightly less marks. And in the linear route, paper 2 will assess all of the content, including the content that is in bold. It's not only the content that's in bold. Paper 2 covers all of it. For the module exam, paper 2, again, will cover paper 1 and paper 2 in the module exam are exactly 50% each, and paper 2 will cover all of the content, not only the remaining content. So paper 1 is topic 1 and 2, paper 2 is all of the content. Now we're going to look a little bit at teaching in a modular way. Oh, this is a page from the specification that shows how some of the content is in bold. So 2.63b and 2.64b, which are in bold, will only be tested in paper 2 if you choose the linear route. But the not in bold will come up on paper 1, and paper 2 can cover any part of the content. Now, the modular GCSE is first teaching is this September. It's a new course. It will be introduced from this September. And the first assessment of the first module is the following exam series in May and June. So the expectation for a modular route is at the end of the first year of teaching, you will take paper 1. And at the end of the second year of teaching, your students will take paper 2. Now, the course planners, editable schemes of work and getting started guide are in process at the moment. So they will be uploaded onto the relevant qualifications website as soon as they are available, ready for you to start teaching in September. One of the benefits of a modular approach is that learners can resit any unit irrespective of whether the qualification is to be cashed in. If a learner resits a unit more than once, only the better of the 2 most recent attempts of that unit will be available for aggregation to a qualification grade. So it will only be the 2 most recent that will be looked at, but the better of those will become part of the qualification grade. Results of the units will be held in Pearson Edexcel's unit bank for as many years as this specification remains available. And once the International GCSE in Chemistry has been certified, all unit results are deemed to be used up at that level. These results cannot be used again towards a further award of the same qualification at the same level. So you have, some of you may also be teaching the double award as opposed to separate sciences or specifically biology. Paper 1 is common to the double award or the separate international GCSE in each of the 3 sciences. So to obtain an international GCSE in biology, you need paper 1 and paper 2, and the same for chemistry and physics. To obtain a double award science, international GCSE in science, you need paper 1 from biology, paper 1 from chemistry, and paper 1 from physics. So biology is what we are focusing on today, but it is quite possible to use this approach to teach double award science as well. Double award science means that the students don't do paper 2, so they don't have to study the parts of the specification that are in bold. So now we're going to look in more detail at the content for biology. We've briefly mentioned the 5 topic areas. We're now going to look at them in more detail. So these are the 5 topic areas. You will find more details in the specification about what exactly will be covered. But we've got the nature and variety of living organisms, structures and functions in living organisms, reproduction and inheritance, ecology and the environment, and use of biological resources. You can teach them in any order, although some of them, particularly the use of biological resources, are would be better left towards the end because they're possibly more difficult. And ecology, you might want to consider the time of the year if you want to do certain of the practicals. So topic 1 is the nature and variety of living organisms. If you look at the specification, it looks to be a very big section, but there's a lot of detail given. There's not actually a large number of questions on the paper. There's lots of key vocabulary given in the specification and examples are given. So it isn't a bigger topic than the other topics. It just takes up quite a lot of space in the specification. It includes key features of living organisms and viruses. Students often find fungi and protoctis difficult, so the key vocabulary is given to help them. And they should be familiar with these key terms such as mycelium, hyphae, chitin, eukaryote, and prokaryote, and pathogen. And examples of organisms and viruses are given, such as pneumococcus and HIV. Overall, this topic counts for about 5% of the marks over the 2 papers. Now, when we come on to topic 2, the structure and functions in living organisms, this is a large section and it's all about physiology. Physiology, biochemistry, cells. It's what most people think of, or most students think of, when they think of biology. This is the sort of thing that they expect to be studying. Now, some subjects it considers both plants and animals, but some sections, such as the kidney and gas exchange in plants, are only on paper 2. These are possibly the more challenging concepts. Topic 3 is reproduction and inheritance. Again, there are 2 subtopics. reproduction for one and inheritance for the other. It's a large section about reproduction in humans, plants, and genetics. The genetics has classical genetics and also molecular genetics. Some things have been moved in recently, such as transcription, understanding how transcription and translation takes place, which was previously restricted to A-level studies. And it also looks at natural selection and mutation. Topic 4 is ecology and the environment. And this topic has 4 subtopics. It's a topic that covers ecology and human impacts. And there's a lot of detail about greenhouse gases and the nitrogen cycle and other human impacts. It looks at the organisms in the environment, feeding relationships, cycles within ecosystems, human influences on the environment. Many students find the nitrogen cycle particularly challenging. The greenhouse gases that are included are water vapor, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, and CFCs. They're all listed as greenhouse gases. And the topic looks at how these are produced and the impact on the climate. Topic 5 is the use of biological resources. And again, it's got 4 subtopics: food production, selective breeding, genetic modification, and cloning. And it's got several different themes. It's got lots of variety in it. It ranges from the use of greenhouses, bread making, cloning, genetic engineering. Some of the concepts in here students find difficult. It also brings its most synoptic topic. It brings in areas from other parts of the specification. So this topic is best left towards the end of the course. Now, we're going to go on from here to have a look at how we go from looking at the specification to actually planning our teaching. Pearson publish an editable scheme of work, so you can download it, you can modify it, you can adjust it to fit your particular teaching requirements. It has a suggested order in it, which is the same as the specification, but it can be edited and modified to change the running order, because obviously the running order and timings will depend on the school, the classes, how long a period the course is taught over, and the topics can be taught in any order. The scheme of work also has suggested activities for all of the topics, practical activities and other types of activities as well. The order and timings will also depend on whether you teach the course over 1, 2, or 3 years. I should imagine most of you are either 2 years or 3 years. Now, the scheme of work will help you, but again, this says 2017, but it is, these resources are being updated and will be updated before the start of the teaching of the new course in September. Although there's not much change to the content, the main change is if you choose, is the choice between modular and linear. but we need to use the specification. We need to continually be checking against the specification to make sure that we are covering all the content, and also as we're going through the content, looking at the different types of assessment that will be used when they come to do the exams. So this is an example of part of the scheme of work. And it is looking at, this is looking at structures and functions in living organisms, the levels of organization, cell structure. So you've got the learning outcomes in the first column. You've got exemplar activities in the third column. Different activities that you may carry out with your students. You've got a poster, you've got an interactive exercise which is available to your students, suggestions on a class debate on stem cell use, and then a suggestion for an activity that the students can carry out themselves. You've got a list of resources that are available. You've then got transferable skills which are explicitly assessed through examination, and transferable skills which could also be acquired through teaching and delivery. So it's a scheme of work that gives you ideas of what you could bring into your lessons. So we're now going to think about what order we should teach the topics in. I would like you to go to the chat box and list 3 topics that you think should be covered at the start of the course, 2 topics that you think should be taught at the end of the course, and then give 1 topic that is synoptic, which means it links to many other areas of the specification. So if you could do that in the chat box for me, please. 3 topics at the start of the course, 2 topics at the end of the course, and 1 topic that is synoptic. And we'll see how much we're in agreement. The topics are the nature and variety of living organisms, structure and functions in living organisms, reproduction and inheritance, ecology and the environment, and the use of biological resources. If we start off thinking about the 5 main topics, we might want to think about being more specific later, but if you think about the 5 main topics, Thank you for your input. Most of you are suggesting that you should start with either topic 1 or topic 2, or maybe parts of topic 2, cell structure and structure of living organisms. There isn't any one way of teaching it. It depends on your pupils, what you've done previously, what type of, whether you're doing it over 2 or 3 years. But the key thing is that everything in the specification needs to be covered. Some topics, such as the physiology, need to go first because they are required. You build on those as you go through the course. Some topics students tend to find more difficult, such as particularly the biological resources, which draws on many different aspects of the curriculum, and also ecology and the environment. And ecology and the environment in particular depends on how it fits into the time of year in the area where you're working, because there is some practical work that requires field work. So that has to be coincided with an appropriate time of the year. As you are working through it, it is always very useful to make links and revisit concepts. These are the sort of things that you need to consider when planning a scheme of work. And although Pearson produces a scheme of work, it is editable and you can change the order and modify it to fit your particular circumstances. And so these are some of the considerations that you need to think of when planning a scheme of work and the order that you're going to teach the topic in. Some of the underpinning topics, such as cells and transport across membranes and enzymes, are basic to understanding other parts of the course, so they need covering early. You may want to put the more difficult concepts towards the end of the course, but then you need to make sure that you allow time to fit them in properly. Some topics require knowledge from other areas of the course. For example, when you talk about gas exchange, you need a knowledge of diffusion. And then there's an example of fish farming, which is in topic 5, bringing a lot of things together, such as pollution, respiration, digestion, nitrogen cycle, etc. And then you've got the seasonal availability of plants, not only for the ecology, but for practicals on photosynthesis and things. You need them to be available. Now we're going to think about teaching gas exchange in humans. This is the section of the specification that focuses on gas exchange. Can you write in the chat box any other areas of the specification that this topic might link to? Or any particular thing that the students need to know or might be covered while you are teaching about gas exchange in humans. If you could put some ideas into the chat box for me as to what else, what you think this might link to and what they will need. We're getting some, your answers indicate just how interlinked many biological topics are, or almost all biological topics. Diffusion and respiration are obvious links that need to be made. Also, circulatory system. The idea of linking it to the skeletal structure and to bone and cartilage is also very interesting, because obviously you need that to understand how the volume of the lungs changes. So there's many different links that can be made, and it is always useful as you are working through the specification to refer back to things that have already been taught and to make links. So this is some of the ideas of things that you might want to link to. Diffusion, how factors that affect the rate of diffusion. Respiration, you need a basic understanding of respiration to understand why oxygen needs to get into the circulatory system in the first place. You also need to think about which order you need to teach these topics, whether you would link back to respiration when you taught it later, or whether you need to teach it first. Diffusion in particular, you need an understanding of diffusion before you can understand gas exchange. And respiration to understand why you need gas exchange. Now, these are some of the other areas that can link to gas exchange. And we've put flowering plants in here. It's all in bold, so it is likely to be something you teach during the second part of the course. But when you're teaching gas exchange in flowering plants, you may well want to refer back to revisit at this point human gas exchange, with a particular emphasis on the role of surface area in affecting the rate of diffusion. because this is applicable obviously to both plants and animals. Now, there's a lot of content for students to learn, and they do need to be familiar with all of it. So we need to think about how we can help students with their understanding of the content. Students need to be encouraged to self-identify what they are finding more difficult, of the areas that they're weaker in. And there's several techniques we can use to help them achieve this. So we can give them clear checklists for each time we teach a topic so that they can go through them and make sure that they know that everything on that checklist has been covered, and they know which bit of their learning relates to that checklist. We need to encourage metacognition, getting them to evaluate their own knowledge. And then after they've done tests and exams, get them to assess their weaker topics by giving them a grid to write their marks in that will highlight where they need to focus their revision. So this is a type of checklist that they may be given when they're learning about respiration and gas exchange. There's 3 columns. So they need to go through and tick whether they feel very happy with that part of the specification, whether they are okay with it, or whether it's an area that they feel they need to go back and revisit. So it's a good idea to encourage your students to be doing this on a regular basis. When they've had a test on a particular topic, whether it is a large exam or an end of topic test, it's useful to get them to fill in a test grid when they get their paper back. The grid gives specific specification references, so that will help them to identify weaker areas. And the assessment objectives, which we're going to come on to talk about next, are also given, so it will help them to self-identify where they lose the marks. So for each part of the question, the specification reference has been identified, and when exam papers are written, a grid is produced to go alongside them that also identifies the specification reference. So this is an ongoing process all the way through. It gives the maximum mark. It allows them to fill their score in, and then it indicates which assessment objective this question was looking at. So, for instance, question 1A, 3 marks. It's the specification reference 2.54, and it's testing assessment objective 1. The second part of the question, A2, same specification reference, but it's testing assessment objective 2. And then we get on, it goes all the way through, so it gives the maximum mark for the whole question and also for each of the separate assessment objectives, so students can see which areas of the content they find it more difficult, and also which type of assessment objective they're finding more difficult. So we are now going to come on to look at the assessment objectives in a second. Past exams, there's a question about past exams. what specification aspect is being assessed for each question. You will have to check with your local representative, but I think when the question papers are prepared, a grid is prepared that says exactly which part of the specification is being tested and which assessment objective to ensure that there's an even coverage. I think these are made available, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So check with your local representative whether these are available. The examiner's report also will make mention of the assessment objectives that are being the specification aspect and assessment objectives for each question. So we'll come on to this later, but it is worth making use of all the resources that Pearson produce. But actually on the exam paper itself and on the mark scheme, it doesn't indicate what specification aspect it is. Yeah, it's very important that students are aware of the different assessment objectives. It's AO1, AO2, and AO3. And we will go through each one in turn. The questions on the exam papers will focus on all three objectives, and it's important that pupils are aware of how they will be assessed. Many pupils and some teachers only focus on the content, and the assessment model is really important. As the papers are written, as if you've got a question that's got 4 parts to it, maybe, they won't all look at the same assessment objectives. Each part of the question is likely to look at a different assessment objective, but it is important that students are aware of these. The balance of assessment objectives is the same on paper 1 and paper 2, and AO1 and AO2 are now equal. On the previous specification, there was more AO1 than AO2, but they're now equal. AO1 is knowledge and understanding. AO2 is application of knowledge and understanding and analysis and evaluation of biology. And AO3 is experimental skills, analysis and evaluation of data and methods in biology. So if we start off by looking at assessment objective 1, it's about understanding the content and about learning the content. So conscientious students like AO1 questions because they can learn it. It is essentially practical. It is knowledge. It's testing their knowledge. It's what they've actually learned. So they need to revise it using things like repetitions, mind maps, testing with flashcards, going through questions. Can you type into the chat box ideas about how you help your students learn the factual content of the specification, please? I have a few ideas in the chat box as to how you can help students learn the factual content. I know there are ideas on the screen, but does anybody do anything different or have any other ideas they might like to share? Yes, we're getting some good ideas here. Question cards, summaries, displays, looking at videos. I always like to do flowcharts for some of the Thank you. Now, this, yes. This is a typical A01 question. It's testing their factual knowledge. There's only one correct right answer. It doesn't involve them explaining anything. It's just knowing the answer to these questions. These examples are multiple choice, but they won't all be multiple choice questions. Some of the AO1 questions are multiple choice, and some multiple choice questions can be AO2 or AO3 as well. It's not restricted. If we look at AO2, this is the application of knowledge to familiar and unfamiliar contexts. So they can be asked a question that they need knowledge for, but they need to apply it in an unfamiliar context. Maybe a suggest question. A lot of AO2 questions are suggest. It may involve higher cognitive demand, such as evaluate and discuss. It may include calculations and graph plotting. Any quantitative question will be an AO2 question. You can't just do it by learning, so it may be more challenging for less confident students. So again, it needs practice. Practice answering this type of question, practice looking at the command words and deciding what type of question it is. The percentages of each AO2 were 38 to 42% for each of AO1 and AO2, and then the remainder AO3. Now, this is a typical AO2 question. So you've got some data, the result of a study of people with heart disease, and then it asks you to make two conclusions from this study. The conclusions, obviously, that you would expect them to make is that the incidence of heart disease increases with age, and the incidence of heart disease in males is greater than the incidence of heart disease in females at any age. So it's analysis of data, It's applying knowledge, so therefore it is an AO2 question. AO3 is looking at practical skills. It's experimental skills, analysis, and evaluation of data and methods. It can include questions about core practicals, but quite often it will take a core practical and then put it into a different context. So it's AO3 and not AO1. It also includes general practical themes and skills that students need to be aware of, such as understanding validity, planning, how you plan an investigation to make sure you get valid results, looking at reliability and accuracy. It may require higher cognitive skills when evaluating data from an experiment or an experimental procedure. There's no separate practical exam or internal practical assessment, or the assessment of practical abilities and practical understanding is all in the questions on the exam paper. So this is a typical AO3 question. Now it actually, again, it's an example of how one question will test more than one assessment objective. So part 1, complete the table by calculating the average. That's a calculation. That is AO2. And then part 2, explain whether the results are reliable, is AO3, because it's looking at the reliability and it's requiring students to look at, they've got no information about how the practical is carried out, but they're looking at the data and looking at whether you've got a similar pattern in each of the 3 repetitions to conclude or explain whether the results for each colour are reliable. And students will be expected to look at the data, and they will be expected to look at the different colours separately as well. Now, this is a typical AO3 planning question. So you've got plant growth substances stimulate root growth. Describe an investigation to find the best concentration of plant growth substance. It's a 6-mark question. You should include experimental details in your answer and write in full sentences. So students are required to give a detailed account of how they would carry out this investigation, with details about how they would generate reliable results, the variables that will need to be controlled, a standard plan for an investigation. There are past papers with these types of questions on and mark schemes to go with them, which we will look at in more detail in module 2. But it is always worth using past papers and using the mark schemes that come with them, because that gives an idea of what the examiners were looking for. So I'm going to give you some questions, and I'd like you to put into the chat box which assessment objective you think they are testing. So can you all put into the chat box which assessment objective you think this question is looking at? This is quite definitely an AO3 question because it is looking at the independent variable. Independent variable is experimental design. Therefore, it is an AO3 question. Without knowing exactly what the question, the background to it, it's not possible to be 100% sure which is the dependent variable. But the answer is that it is an AO3 question, which most of you agreed with. Just because it's a multiple choice doesn't mean that it can't be an AO3 question. Now this question is about pollution. Carbon monoxide can pollute the atmosphere. Describe the effects of carbon monoxide pollution on humans. I would again like you to put into the chat box what you think, which AO you think this is testing. Let's give a couple more minutes for people to type in, and then we'll talk about it. There was a bit more variation in your thoughts on this question. This is actually an AO1 question because it says describe the effects of carbon monoxide pollution on humans. It is factual knowledge. It's descriptive factual knowledge. They should have learned what the effect of carbon monoxide on the blood and on hemoglobin. Describe will almost always be an AO1 question because it's just asking them to repeat what they have learned in order to answer the question. You were possibly not confused, but thought it may be AO2 because it's got 3 marks, but AO1 questions can be longer questions as well. They can be 3 or sometimes even 4 marks. But it's the fact that it's factual information. It's not requiring you to apply. It's not evaluation. It's just asking them to repeat what they have learned. It's not evaluating the effect. A question could have been phrased differently that required them to apply that knowledge in a different context, but this is purely and simply asking them to repeat what they have learned about the effect of carbon monoxide pollution on humans. Therefore, it is an AO1 question. Now, this question, if mineral ions are not absorbed, they are ingested in the feces. The feces of genetically modified farm animals contain less phosphate than the feces of normal farm animals. Some people catch fish from rivers near farmland. Discuss why these people might support the genetic modification of farm animals. Can you type into the chat box which assessment objective you think this one is, please? Absolutely correct. This is an AO2 question. The given information, they are asked to use their knowledge to answer a question in a different context. These are the questions that some students find more difficult. It is worth spending time practicing these type of questions and encouraging your students not to panic if they're given a question where they think they've not been taught it, because the information they will need to answer the question will be things that they have been taught. The content may be unfamiliar, but the actual information they need to answer it will be something that they know about. Now, linked to this, we're going to come on to command words. Taxonomy. Not to be confused with taxonomy in naming species. The command words are used to write exam questions. All questions have a command word, and it will be a command word that is listed in the specification. So there are specific command words that are used, and they tell candidates what's required in their answers. The specification lists all the command words. So students need to be familiar with the command words that are used. The command words are the same across all three sciences. And they are fairly self-explanatory, but it's important students are aware of. The most commonly used ones are describe, explain, evaluate, discuss, suggest, and comment on. If it's describe, it will almost always be an AO1 answer. It's using knowledge that they have. Explain will be almost always AO2. An explain answer should be able to have therefore or because in it. Discuss, you need to be able to bring different sides of an argument. Evaluate will be either looking at data or looking at an experimental technique. When you are going through practice papers or past questions with them, ask them to identify the command word before they start answering the question, because that will give them a clue as to what sort of information is required in the answer. They're there in the specification, and they are an important aspect of teaching, of preparing students to answer exam questions. And the next thing we want to look at is the core practicals. All the courses, all the science courses, have a series of core practicals that candidates could complete. Now, there's no longer any checklist or internal assessment of practicals. They'll be tested on the knowledge of these practicals in the exam papers. And it may well be a modified version of the practical. For instance, they will have done an osmosis practical. You might get a question that gives a different scenario, or aspects of them may be used in different contents, such as given an experiment that is testing for starch, using an iodine test. It may not be the test that they have done to test. It may not have been the situation that they've used it, but it will be testing their knowledge of either an indicator solution or that an iodine test is used for starch. They also need to be familiar with typical school laboratory equipment, how to plan experiments that will generate valid data, and how to analyze and evaluate the data. So they need to be able to critically evaluate practical work and experimental methods. So this is the list of core practicals. The double award is everything that's not in bold. The practicals in bold are only in the biology GCSE, and they will only be tested in paper 2. So if you're teaching double award science, you do not need to cover the practicals that are in bold. Now, some of them can obviously be achieved by different methods. For instance, 2.17, it says investigate diffusion and osmosis using living and non-living systems. There are a number of ways of doing this, and you need to choose which is the most appropriate way for your situation. And again, 5.6, investigating the role of anaerobic respiration by yeast. Students need to be able to take what they've done and apply it to whatever situation they are given in the exam paper. Now, this is an example of how a core practical may be assessed. It's practical on osmosis, 2.17, and it also tests general practical skills. So, first part of the question, both parts of these are AO3, testing practical ability. Explain what happens to the level of the sucrose solution in the glass tube. The key things linked to osmosis are identified: the partially permeable membrane, the difference in concentration because you've got water and you've got a sucrose solution, and a glass tube that the sucrose solution can move up. So it's a standard way of assessing the core practical. Part B, describe how this apparatus could be modified to measure the rate of osmosis at different temperatures. It's also AO3, and it's taking the situation that you're given and looking at how you would extend it to look at different temperatures. This is different core practical. This is germinating seeds. Two core practicals in an unfamiliar context. So you've got the germinating seeds, you've got soda lime. It is 2.39 because it is looking at the evolution of carbon dioxide. Which is a practical that they should have done. It also tests 2.23 because it's looking at the role of soda lime, and the soda lime absorbs carbon dioxide. So again, it's apparatus they should be familiar with. It's testing it in a different context, and this is the way that core practicals will, in general, be tested. Yes, the questions that cover more than one part of the specification. If both parts are in unit 1 and 2, then they can be in paper 1 of the modular paper. If they take practicals that are from more from the other units, the remaining units, then they will only be in paper 2 because paper 2 covers all of the specification. Then we have a list of the experimental skills that we expect at GCSE on all courses, whether it is biology, physics or chemistry, and therefore on double award courses as well as biology courses. And again, they're assessed on the exam paper. And particular things that you need to think about is the bullet points about planning, about variables, about use of scientific knowledge, and graphs, and the evaluation of techniques. These, on which are 9 and 10. These particularly are things that you need to emphasize with your students. So that is the planning, variables, use of scientific knowledge, graphs, and evaluation of techniques. Now, there are support materials available to help with your teaching of the core practicals. Both of these are available on the website and can be downloaded. It's one Again, I'm aware it says 2017, but these will be updated and available to you with the new specification, although the actual list of pure core practicals has not changed. But there's a list of methodology for each of the core practicals, so a guide that will give you an idea of how to carry out each of the core practicals, and then a guide on using practical terminology to go with it, which is experimental skills to a large extent. So again, if you are teaching Edexcel, you have got access to all these support materials on the website. All the ones I've talked about so far are the free ones that are available when you sign up to teach it. They are there to help you, so make use of all of them. Even if you don't teach every practical, make sure that you know what the list is, you know the methodology, and that your students do as well. Now, the final aspect of teaching that we need to look at is the math skills that students need to be familiar with before when learning biology. It has been identified that math skills are essential to be able to progress in science subjects. They are tested on the exam paper. The list of math skills is in the appendix for each specification. They're tested within the context of the science. So the data to be used will be scientific data from biology experiments. It will be part of a question, and the math skills will account for 10% of the marks in biology. So the use of soda lime to absorb carbon dioxide is carried out in respiration experiments, is part of biology as well. They should be familiar with that, even if they're just doing a biology course and not any other science. So this is a list of all the math skills that they need to be aware of. The BCP is biology, chemistry, and physics. Most of the skills are common to both. Some of them are specific to biology. Some of them are specific to physics and chemistry as well. So, but for the biology ones, you just need to be aware of them. And this idea of 10% of the marks being maths marks continues on into A level. So, and it's worth encouraging students to just be comfortable with answering maths questions, not to panic when they see them, because if they stop to think about it, they can answer them. So if we have a look, this is a typical maths question. You've got the population of the United Kingdom, tells you that half of them are male. You've already had some data on the percentage of males with heart disease in the age range 18 to 44. So you use the data from the table plus the 65 million, half of which are male, and it asks you to calculate the number of males. So it's maths, it's linked back to data that they've already been given, a table that they've already been given, and will just be a part of the question. And encourage your students to make sure that they have got calculators with them in the exam. It just saves time. They don't want to have to work everything out from scratch. Many maths questions focus on skills such as graphs, percentages, ratios, and probability. Things like genetic questions on probability, using percentages to calculate something like this. Again, there is a publication about maths for scientists, a guide to maths for scientists. This document again can be downloaded from the website. So that covers a lot of the content of what we wanted to look at today. We're now going to go on to think about the support that Pearson provides for centres that are teaching their subjects. So that all these are free resources. There's support for you at every stage. There's support in the planning, teaching and learning, with the getting started guide, the training events. There's a subject advisor support who you can contact, community forums, schemes of work which are published and which can be edited, schemes of work, skills mapping, sample assessment materials, and examiner reports. At the end of every examination series, the examiner, the principal examiner, produces a report identifying there's a report on each question saying whether students found it more difficult, less difficult, an example of a good answer to that question, and a comment on it. It is worth making good use of the examiner's reports when preparing your students for exams. Then we've got exam preparation and assessment, sample assessment materials, examiner's reports, exemplar mark responses, which will be in the examiner reports, past papers, exam wizard, mark schemes, results plus, which we'll come on to talk about in a minute. And then when you've got your results, there is support as well. There are teaching and learning materials available online, all of which are free to download. There is your subject advisor. Also, her contact details are there. As I say, it is worth becoming familiar with the website and making use of the materials that are there to help you. A summary again of what's available that you can download. Topic guides for each of the topics, which are downloadable for use. And one of the features that is unique to Pearson Edexcel is Results Plus. It's a tool that teachers might find very useful to analyze their students' results. It enables you to identify areas where maybe all your students have found it particularly difficult. It enables you to identify student performance on an individual student. It identifies topics and questions where further learning could inform teaching strategies and approaches. It lets you know how your school is going on against other centres. It also can be used for mock exams. So if your students do their mock exams, you can put their results into Results Plus, and then it will give the same sort of analysis, which will give you an overall centre analysis of topics that have been proved to be difficult, and also give individual feedback for each of your students. And you need to sign up for it, but all schools can sign up for free if you're teaching the qualification by following the link at the bottom. And it is a very, very useful tool. Now, the reason that it has been possible to develop this is because Pearson uses a method of marking known as ePen. So students sit their exams, all the exam papers get sent off to a centre, and then they are scanned into the ePen system, which means that as a marker, you log into your ePen account and you will work through, for instance, if you mark 20 of question 1A, you will mark 20 different students' work, then you log into a different question, which means that the questions are marked, the whole paper is not marked by the same person. The questions are marked individually. The information is all collated. So you have got a lot of data on each of the different parts of the exam question. And this enables it to be analysed and for a Results Plus report to be produced as an overall report on each of the different questions, or as a report specific to the centre, or a report specific to the student. And these are all accessible by teachers, which can then be shared with the students. The exam papers and the mark schemes are available online after the exam has been sat. When you're doing practice papers, it is always worth making use of the published mark schemes because it will show you exactly what examiners were looking for when they were marking the papers. And there's a lot of emphasis on consistency and making sure that everybody is marking to the same standard. In addition to Results Plus, we also have Exam Wizard, which again is a free tool for teachers. It's full of questions which are tagged against the unit, the topic, or the assessment objective. So you can use it to set homework for students, to set topic tests, to set mock exams. It comes with the mark schemes that we used to mark those questions when they were sat. It also has the examiner's reports. It means that more recent exam content is available sooner, and you can use the results to understand where where your students need more support. And the bank of potential questions increases with each series. Pearson also allows access to scripts through their online portal. And again, it's a free online portal. Teachers can immediately access electronically marked exam papers. It's online, free, and instant from results day onwards. One of the benefits is that you can see what your students have written, where they've gained marks. It cuts down on speculative inquiry after results, as you've got the time and information needed to make informed decisions. The scripts don't have any examiner annotation on them. They have the marks, but that is all. They don't have any indication of where the marks were allocated. Edexcel is the only awarding organisation to offer this free of charge. Your access to scripts plus results plus allows you to give a detailed breakdown of your students' performance in exams. And using these two together will help you identify topics and skills where your students could benefit from further learning. And you can find out more about the Access to Scripts service and the user guide that takes you through it at quals.pearson.com. In addition to that, Pearson produce resources that you can pay for, that you can buy. There's the curriculum matched student books with active books, so that gives them access to further information online, and there are teaching hubs. These resources are designed for anyone following the latest Pearson International GCSE who want the best preparation for exam success and progression to the next level of their studies. These resources are specifically designed for international learners with appropriate international content. So they're not exactly the same as the books produced for the Edexcel qualification. They're produced for the globally recognized 9:1 grading scale. Each student book gives a 3-year access to an active book, which is a digital version of the student book, which can be accessed anywhere online and supports learning beyond the classroom. We also have, or Pearson also have, brand new teaching hubs platform, one for biology, one for chemistry, and one for physics, designed to save teachers time and help them deliver high quality lessons. Online teacher resource packs provides further planning, teaching and assessment support for the single science award and the double science award. The embedded transferable skills needed for progression to higher education employment are signposted so that students can understand and engage with the skills they're gaining. And it has all been reviewed by a language specialist. All the curriculum books have been reviewed by a language specialist to ensure the book is written in a clear and accessible style and have glossaries of special science vocabulary. So that's the curriculum books. That's the book. The teaching hubs are new, and they are to enable you to spend less time planning because they've got schemes of work that break the International GCSE specifications into hour-long sessions with detailed lesson plans and time allocations to suit different lengths, as well as in-depth teacher guidance. They deliver great subject lessons with a wealth of front-of-class resources linked from the lesson plans, including interactive exercises, animations and videos. So you can get your whole class exam ready with lesson plans giving partially scripted instructions for communicating the new learning points and correcting misconceptions. And interactive exam preparation resources. So those are very useful things to have, useful to use. There's plenty of support available. In addition to that, you've got your dedicated subject advisor, Irene Mahudin, that gives her phone number and her email address if there's anything you want to contact her about. She's always happy to answer your questions or queries. And if she can't get back to you immediately, she will respond as soon as she can. Now, I think this presentation is actually available to you afterwards, but if you want to take a minute to jot down those contact details, I will leave the slide on there. I hope this has been helpful to you as you embark on teaching or continuing to teach the International GCSE from Edexcel. If you have any questions,